This is the Hype Squad with Charli McConnell, a podcast where women can be full of themselves and brag about what they're good at. Each week, we're going to bring you conversations covering topics like motherhood, life, relationships, business, and everything in between, because anything is possible with your very own Hype Squad. What's up, ladies? Welcome back to the Hype Squad. I'm Charli McConnell, your host, and today we have Lisa Bradshaw. She is a cancer survivor, widow, author, TEDx speaker, and founder of the Don't Wait Project. After losing her husband to a rare illness, Lisa turned personal tragedy into purpose, creating platforms that inspire others to live intentionally and share their stories. Through her memoir, Big Shoes, and her work as the host of Life with Lisa Bradshaw, she empowers people to move through grief, find resilience, and make meaningful impact. Her work blends heart, humor, and hard-won wisdom, encouraging others not to wait for the perfect moment to start living fully. Now she helps female entrepreneurs take their stories and expertise and turn it into opportunities that matter, whether that's stepping onto a stage, pitching to media, or building partnerships that align with their biggest goals. Lisa, welcome to the Hype Squad.
Thank you for that nice intro. It's
You're
amazing. Thank
welcome.
you.
You did
Yeah,
all
thank
of it.
you.
I'm just talking about it.
Oh gosh.
I'm so excited for us to talk. We obviously were talking a little bit before we recorded, and you have so many cool stories to share. I mean, I feel like we could talk for a really long time just talking about the things that you've done. Um, so we'll see what we can do with our time. We
Okay.
won't spend all day on this recording. We'll see.
Okay.
But there are a couple of really cool stories I would love for you to start with. Um, One of which has to do with Friends, which is the most popular TV show of our generation. So tell me about your story that has to do with Friends.
Oh, that's a good one. It stood the test of time, hasn't it? It's been
It's
like a long time, and it's still a story. It's still a question I get asked often, pretty much every interview, and I love it. So I had started an alphabet pillow business, and the backstory is that I met my late husband when I was 8 years old, and he was 10, and I had a crush on him all of the years. But he moved away when I was 10 and he was 12, so I hadn't seen him for many years. And in 10th grade in home ec, we had to do a sewing project, and I sewed pillows that were in shapes of letters of the alphabet, and I sewed out his name, Wesley. And it was just a very standard pattern that you can probably still buy today. So fast forward 2 years later, too many years later, not 2 years later, we're married, we have a son, and he is starting preschool, and I'm trying to kind of think of what I could do to be creative, maybe add a little extra money to our household. And so I thought, well, I'm making these pillows, but they were kind of boring and I wanted to make them more whimsical. And it's architecture, right? To make a C look like a C and not fall over on itself and all of that. So I just started pitching local boutiques. The day I dropped my son off at preschool, I had meetings in boutiques in Houston, and they said yes. And so I had these books that they'd pick the fabric from and the trim, and I was just going to sew them myself. And then I got so many orders that I started hiring subcontractors, mom who could also work from home and sew. And I just thought, this is a really good idea. And I wanted a website. And that was before we had website builders and all of that. So I had to hire someone who knew how to code. And I found this woman who was lovely and said she'd start it all for $500. And this was in 2002-ish, 3-ish. And so I thought, well, I can't justify that expense because I had a really great place in my life where I could try something and fail and didn't really matter because Wesley paid the mortgage.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't spend money failing, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
um so I thought, well, I can't justify the website without some kind of reason for the media to want my story. And by then I had a story, I'd survived cancer, had my son, and despite the risk of infertility and all of those things. And so about that time, Emma, the baby on Friends, was about to be born. And I'd had a publicist years ago with my first book, borrowed $25,000 from my in-laws for this publicist. I did a Google search and I think it's $49,000 in today's dollar. So yeah, it was a lot of money then and now.
Hello.
And they didn't do a great job. So I just learned how to pick up the phone and pitch myself. And so I thought, well, I'm just going to call the set decorator of Friends and tell him I have these pillows and see if he'd want to have them on the show. And I had no idea that businesses were lining up to get their stuff on the show. I didn't know I didn't even know really what it meant to have your product on a show, except I thought it was a good idea. And I don't know if I would have still pitched it had I known that there were businesses lined up, but I think I would have, because what would it hurt? I was going to start with the biggest show because I knew it would get calls returned from the media. And if it wasn't friends, I'd just keep going kind of down, down, down until I found a show that would agree to it. So I call him up and he thought it was a great idea. I sent him 3 different colors. I sent him the name Emma too. And when he first put it on the show, he put Emma on it. And it's only on one episode. It's on an episode in Ross's apartment on a shelf, and you can barely see it. And then he calls me and he leaves a message and he says, "Don't be disappointed when you see it. Just hold on. There's something going on with the plot that I can't tell you, but you're going to like where I put the E-pillow." And it was that Rachel was going to move in with Joey. And so the E was prominently displayed on the on the wall in Joey's apartment for like the last 2 seasons of the show. And boy, did it get calls returned from the media. I mean, it was the hook I needed. Yeah. It was
Oh,
crazy.
oh my
Yeah.
God. Oh my
Mhm.
God. Okay, anyone who's listening to this who has not been living under a rock, who is, I don't know, 30 or older. I don't even know. I grew up watching Friends. I don't remember what year it started, but it has stayed relevant because of streaming platforms and such.
Mhm.
Anyone who has ever seen those last couple of seasons knows exactly
Yeah.
what we're talking about. The big pink E in Joey's apartment. It was between the kitchen wall and the back. It's just surreal.
Yeah.
And I can't even imagine for you to be able to watch those and know that's yours and the magnitude of that. But what I'm oh so much more impressed by is the fact that you thought about that idea, that that was your go-to of like, what's the worst they're going to say? Like they're going to say no, and then what? Like I'm just going to call another place. And you shot for the, like, that is the coolest story. Thank you so much for sharing,
Yeah.
because I mean my jaw is on the floor. That's
Ah,
crazy.
well, the thing is that I had also already had my first book published. And when I was going through that process with my agent, well, there's a whole story about my agent turning me down. I found her through another book, and the author, I called her up because her book was so good. It was The Shortest Distance Between You and a Published Book by Susan Page. So I called up Susan Page and she said, "Hey, I have an agent in mind for you." So I reached out to that agent and she's like, "You're not ready. You have no platform. You'd have to do this, 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 and this for me to even think about it." Fine. So I went and did this, 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 and this. It took me like 6 months. And I called her up and she couldn't believe I did any of the things she said. And she signed me that day. And so then she starts pitching me. And it's my first book is about my cancer story. And it comes directly mostly from my journal. And cancer books are a tough sell. She knew that. But she signed me because she said if I did all those things, she would. And so she starts pitching me, and we are getting rejection after rejection after rejection. And I'm asking her to send all of them to me because I know it's getting us closer to yes. And this is before email. So she's physically putting them in the mailbox. And she's like, "Why are you doing this to yourself?" And she's frustrated with it. She's a New Yorker, no nonsense. She's like, "I'm not walking to the mailbox every other day. I will mail these once a week now." So she's batching them. And sure enough, it was one of the rejections from a publisher who said, "We're going to pass, but we recommend this other one." And this other one said yes. And so for me, that was the biggest lesson in not being afraid of being told no. And if you can get past the fear of being told no, there is nothing that you can't achieve because you'll eventually get the yes. You have to earn the right to ask the question. You have to do the work that leads up to whatever you're pitching or asking of someone else or a business or whatever. But I knew it was a good idea and I knew that they could say no, and thankfully they didn't. Thankfully they didn't.
So I think what I'm like pulling on the most from that share is like the persistence,
Mhm.
the level of persistence, right? Have you always been like that?
Yeah, according to my parents. According to my parents, yeah, yeah. I think it's innate. And it's a skill too that you learn. You
Yeah.
have to learn where to put that, right? Because if you're just a bossy little kid, that's not going to get you too far. But if you learn to use it in business or to assert yourself or to get back up when you get knocked down, by then I'd already survived cancer, had my baby despite the risk of infertility. What's the worst that can happen? Friend says no. I mean, that's just not a big, huge disappointment in my life if that happens. Now, knowing what it's done for my career and for my business, I'm certainly grateful they said yes. I've always been grateful for it. But if they said no, I'd have figured something else out.
Yeah, it makes me think of perspective, which has been coming up a lot for me in the past couple of weeks with sessions specifically, because you're right. Like when you've faced hard times, your barometer of like what's
Mhm.
painful and what's hurt, like all of that changes drastically. And I've shared quite a bit at this point about my daughter and our journey with epilepsy, and she had a couple of brain surgeries and things like that. And my barometer has changed, right?
Yeah.
Like my,
And it's
and I've,
supposed to.
yeah, but
Yeah.
that's life experience, right? So it's like you have to go out there and face adversity and accept your challenges. And that's what kind of creates, I don't even know if I want to say creates persistence, but definitely fuels persistence. Like, this isn't hard. Like, I'm still going to wake up in the morning, God willing, and the sun is still going to rise. But if I don't take this shot, I'm going to miss out on so many other possibilities, right? What's the
Yeah.
worst thing they could say? No. And then
Mhm.
what? Right?
Yeah.
And then what do?
Next.
You
Yeah.
find something
Next.
else, right?
Mhm.
Oh God, I love it. The next thing on here I wanted to talk about, because I'm like, we got to make sure I hit all my key points because
Okay.
these are all great stories, and then we'll get into the the other stuff. So you have on here Oprah radio appearances, which led to your own radio and then TV show. Tell me about Oprah. Let's talk about that.
Talk about Oprah. So back when she had her show on, so when my pillows appeared, I think it was in Parents Magazine. I received a message from someone, a woman, Shelley, whose one of her products was personalized. It was a canvas painted E on the wall that they had where the crib was in Ross's apartment, just in that little space. And she reached out and said, "Oh, I love your pillow there. Congratulations. My stuff, my paintings on the French show too." So I said, "Let's talk." So we got to talking, and I said, is there anyone else that you know of that's this mompreneur? I don't know if mompreneur was a word back then, but stay-at-home mom kind of
Yeah.
was the thing, who's done something with friends. And she said, "Well, yeah, there's this other woman named Lyerly. She has the blanket that goes across the back of the chair." And I said, "Well, we should gather the three of us and pitch ourselves to the media as these women who've managed to build these stay-at-home businesses with the help of friends." So Lyerly was into graphic design and branding and things before I got into that. And she came up with the idea self-made friends. And so then we pitched it, beautiful, but then you put it in the mail, lovely folder with our stories. And we got a call from an Oprah producer right away, right away. For me, it was the worst possible timing because my late husband was sick and he was in and out of the hospital like 8 times that year. And it was during one of his ICU stays. It was during one of his least critical, but still, I said, "I'm not going. There's no way I'm going." Now, granted, we hadn't been selected yet. And his doctor, by now, we're very close to her. And she says, "I will stay the night on this floor." And he's saying, "You're going no matter what, you're going." But the idea of being on Oprah one, it would have been an absolute logistical nightmare for me to manage all the orders that would have come in from that. And again, these pillows were complicated to sew. I tried getting them mass manufactured in the States. I tried many ways, and it was complicated. You had to be really, really good and get comfortable with them. So that was one thing. Plus, we had a whole lot of other products on the website by then. And then the other part is I just didn't really want to go talk to Oprah for the first time about pillows.
Mm.
And I knew my story was still evolving, and I just wasn't ready to tell it yet. Now, and I honestly don't know what I would have said if they'd have said yes, invited us on. They ended up going, we were going to be $1 million ideas, and they ended up going with like Millionaire Moms or something who'd already done it. And it was a blessing in disguise. So then my husband passed away just months later. And I pretty much, all the things that I'd been building up, like pitching magazines, like I pitched In Style and it took 15 months for it to get in. And the editor and I had, she said, follow up with me every month, every month. And I think it was in the section where to find it, it's called. And we had to get it in there before Friends, before it stopped airing. And it went in Style May when the whole series ended. She managed to finally get it in. And that quadrupled sales for months, and that was just a little 2 by 2. So all these magazines and all these things I'd been pitching were literally like I was walking into Barnes and Nobles with my son. It's 2 weeks after Wesley passed away, and there's In Style magazine, and there's Parents, and there's Better Homes and Gardens, and all these things that magazines take a while.
Mm-hmm.
And so I took pretty much a year off. I had a really good assistant. She was also a friend. So we had to relocate for my late husband's transplant. He ended up having a double lung transplant, and she ran everything when I was there. And then I worked if I could. And then after my husband passed away, I moved to the West Coast within months, my son and I, because that's where I was from, to be closer to my family. And again, she ran everything from Houston. And so what ended up happening was I kind of thought, I'm ready to kind of get in this marketing game again. Where do I want to start? So I sat down and I wrote an email to a senior producer at the Rachel Royce show. And I kind of told her, I told her my story, a small pitch. And they called the next day. And I learned a big lesson from an experience with Gail King that I can share with you if you'd like after I tell this part. But I knew I needed to be ready for this. And so when they called, I knew I had like a minute to help them feel like I could confidently appear on their show. And I did that. And within a couple of days, they were sending a B-roll crew out to film at my house. I was on a plane. I was in New York. I was on Rachel Ray. Well, during that time, I had been on a radio show years ago with my first book. His name was John, and he hosted a radio show, like a 3-hour morning drive talk show, those kinds of shows.
Mm-hmm.
And he had me on when my first book came out. And then he had me on many more times, long after the book life of, promoting a book was over. But we really hit it off. And my dad wrote a chapter for both of my books. And so he ended up having my dad on one of the episodes. So we'd become friends, and he was part of knowing that Wesley'd gotten sick and knowing that Wesley'd passed. And just today, this day, we just talked last week. We're still friends. This was in 2001.
Mm-hmm.
So he ends up sending me a message, and he said, I heard you're on Rachel Ray. And I said, I was. And he said, you ready to get back to work? And I said, yeah. And I was on a plane the next week because he was now a producer of Oprah Radio. So I went on 2 different shows for Oprah Radio. Gene Chatsky had a finance show. We talked about estate planning and everything like that, but we really started talking about grief. And then I was on Nate Berkus's show, and he had lost his partner in the tsunami. Mm-hmm. So while we came to talk about design and my pillows, we ended up talking about life and loss. And I went into the control room, and there was one of the heads of Oprah Radio, and he said, why don't you have a radio show? And I said, I've never thought about that. And so John and I talked over it a bit, and I thought, okay, I'm going to have a radio show. Within X amount of time, I'm going to get a radio show. And X amount of time went by, and I mean months, and I'd done nothing. And so then when I realized I'd done nothing and this time had passed, I started researching radio shows near me, and come to find out there was a talk radio show that was like 90 plus years old, terrestrial radio. And I called up and asked to speak with the general manager, and he said, sure, be here at 10 a.m. tomorrow. And I had nothing. So I'm like scrambling. I found this media guy that could take my interviews on Oprah, even though I had never interviewed anyone on radio, and put them on a disc, and I branded it and everything and took it to him. And that was what happened. Was when I came in for the meeting, he was kind of shaping me up to be the community relations person for the radio stations there, and work together to bring the community to businesses and partnerships and all the kinds of things that businesses and nonprofits can do together. And so the carrot he dangled for me was the show, but he hired me for the job for the media relations. And that's how I learned about sponsorships and partnerships. And he was an amazing mentor. He passed about 6 years ago. But I would not have achieved any of the things that have been sponsored, or, he just taught me that there are businesses that will pay for your dreams if it aligns with community. And so that's how I ended up with my radio show, is because Dan brought me in and gave me the show in exchange for me doing this community work.
I that's such a great story. I feel like, Dan, in your particular story, I mean, I could think of people in my story, depending on the chapter,
Right.
who have held my hand or given me the lessons I needed to advance to the next level. And so I think that was a really beautiful share just about that relationship. And I know, and well, I don't know. I'm assuming that your tours came from that education, right? That lesson, the Toyota tours.
100%.
And we talk about the Don't Wait project too. And I feel like that's probably just the next progression of what happened next. So tell me a little bit about, and we can kind of branch out a little bit because you touched on it a bit in that share about how you can work with businesses to kind of fuel and fund your dream. And you did that. So tell me how that unfolded and what you learned in that process.
Well, it's funny. So when I started working at the radio station, I was the community relations director or something like that. So what had happened is they had bought a company conglomeration had bought these 7 radio station clusters, and no one in our community, a lot of people in our community weren't too happy about it, because now it's like some company somewhere else owning it. And he recognized that. He was a new GM, and he said, I want the community to know we care. I want to partner. I want to do these things. And he wanted someone to be in charge of that. So when I came in looking for the show, I guess in that conversation, by the end of it, he was like, what about this? And I had to work. It was about a month of me sending him ideas and what would it look like and how do I see the position, because we were creating it.
Mm-hmm.
And so what happened was I had access to all these stations to go and record PSAs, whatever I wanted to do to make sure the community knew we cared and was involved. And so there was a young woman who was going through leukemia and looking for a match for her bone marrow transplant.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to do an awareness campaign for her, where we were going to set up and have this company come and do the blood drive and all of that to look for matches. And so I went to this printer company, and I had these flyers I designed, and I went to Dan about it first. He said, sure, go to the printer. And I came back and I said, they want like $52. How do I get $52? Like, who writes the check? How does this work? And he said, well, why don't you go back and see if they'd want to sponsor it? And I said, well, I don't know what that means. And he says, well, if they put their logo on it, then they'll get recognition for supporting this event. And then they usually won't charge us anything, or they'll discount it. So just go find out what you can get done. I'm like, okay. So I go. They said, sure. They put their logo on it. We printed the flyers. Then I proceeded to go all over town and put up all of these flyers. And I came back to Dan and said, okay, I got it for free. And I put up all the flyers. And he says, great. He said, so let me ask you, why didn't you go ahead and just do a PSA? I mean, we have 7 radio stations. Why did you go door to door? And I said, well, I didn't know I could record a PSA. And he says, well, of course you can. You're the king. And then I said, well, why didn't you tell me that? And he says, because how many people did you talk to? How many businesses did you just engage with? I said, well, I had 52 flyers. And he said, well, that's 52 people you just met in our community. Mm-hmm. So he let me walk door to door, even though I could have just gotten on. And that's where it started was, oh, so the flyers can be paid for. And then I started a thing where I was doing breast cancer awareness moments where people would come on and share their story, and I would produce these segments that were, or these PSAs that were 30 seconds or 60 seconds. And they became very popular. So the next year he says, why aren't you monetizing these? And I said, I don't know what that means. He says, well, you could get a sponsor. So he would take me into some of these meetings and then expect me to just talk it through. And he was just amazing that way. And so we ended up having one of the women's hospital groups sponsor the PSAs, and I got a commission for that. And I wasn't expecting it, nor did I care. I was going to do it either way. That was my job. And so it just was building like that. And so what ended up happening was there's a lot of different things. I created exhibits that were around town that I got, businesses to sponsor. And, they're always going to want to sponsor little league teams and theater groups, but you give a business something new to support that aligns with their values and their community.
Mm-hmm.
Why would they say no? So by then, Dan had left here and moved to another state. And I started telling him, I have this idea. And really, what it stemmed from is my son was leaving for college. And I knew I needed something new to do. And when I started my radio show, it was within 2 years after Wesley had passed. And I can't tell you how much it started to heal my life to tell the stories of others. And so I knew that I needed to do some type of storytelling when Hunter left for college. When my son left for college, I mean, I was clinically depressed, I'm certain of it. And sometimes you don't realize you're depressed till you're coming out of it. But you're in bed for 2 months and you're working from a laptop and you're faking it when, you have to be around people. And my hair was falling out. And I mean, I was just an absolute disaster. It felt like a very hauntingly familiar grief. It
Mm-hmm.
wasn't losing my husband. Obviously, this was a happy time. He was going on to do these things in life. But for me, it was something that was changing that I couldn't change back, and it would never be the same. And so I had to make some adjustments. And so I thought, if I go on this storytelling tour, what if I go on a tour and I go find Don't Wait stories? Because by then I'd founded the Don't Wait Project. And that came from all the businesses I'd worked with, these nonprofits. And I wanted to create a storytelling nonprofit. And so I would do things like you see here, these exhibits and content like that. But this tour would be different, and I would travel the country. So I pitched our local town Toyota dealership. And I went in with a one sheet. I completely believe you can achieve just about anything with a one sheet and a meeting. And again, earn the right to be in the room asking. I'd done enough in the community. They knew who I was. That made a difference.
Mm-hmm.
And I had this idea to go on this tour, just 7 states, near me. I would film it myself. I put it all in the budget, the camera, the gear. I had a local tire company committed to wrapping my car, and then a trailer company giving us a discount if the dealership would lease it, all the things. And they said yes. And I went on these seven states. I was gone for 5 weeks. I pulled this adorable teardrop trailer. It didn't have a bathroom. It had just a fancy bedroom, basically, with a TV and air conditioner. And then off the back was the kitchen. And then I, stayed at campgrounds. So I, just showered there. And I went every city I went, I knew somebody. I was trying to be safe. I was on my own. And it was amazing. It was amazing. So then I created an exhibit of the content to promote the next tour. And that was on display in different parts of our community. And Toyota, our local dealership, was on board for another tour, and said there was a grassroots program through Toyota, the corporation. And she took me, the person in charge at this Toyota dealership, took me to an event in Oregon and said, you need to get in front of this person by the end of the weekend. And I was in I was in line to get wine, and she'd gone to use the restroom, and I'm talking to this lovely woman, and she says, who are you? What are you here for? And I said, oh, I accompanied my friends. I'm wanting to talk about the tours I just did. And anyways, long story short, she's the one in charge of deciding how that funding is allocated. And she's like, this is amazing, done. So by the time my friend went to the restroom and came back, we'd sealed the deal, and I never even needed to talk to that guy over there. And so that's how the second tour happened. And then the third tour happened the same way. And so it ended up being 23 states, 3 tours, and so many stories. So many stories. And by the second and third tour, we had the budget for me to hire a cinematographer. And by the second tour, I had a bigger trailer, and now the trailer company is sponsoring it. So they provided 2 trailers, one for me, one for the cinematographer. And we had a bathroom this time and a kitchen inside.
Mm.
And so it just grew. It just got bigger and bigger. And it was life-changing. And it did heal my story again, telling the stories of others and getting to meet people I would have never otherwise met. And it started with that flyer, getting those free flyers.
I, wow. Okay, first off, Lisa, I just want to like say for a second, kind of like stepping out of the moment, and I am in awe of just the little bit of story you've shared so far, and I feel really grateful to even be able to meet and talk and hear your story. I feel like it's inspirational. I feel like um the timing is eerie, that this is like, even when you and I first met,
Mhm.
we were talking about what you do before we started, like way before today. And I'm like, holy cow, this is like crazy divine timing for
Mhm.
me to hear this story. Um, but and there's so much there. I think the biggest thing I pull from that particular part of your story is like, people work with people.
Yes.
People represent brands. Brands don't work with people. People work with people. And
Mhm.
my mom, there's a lot of similarities in your story that feel really close to home to my mom. And my mom was also in radio. My dad died when I was 3. She was a hustler. I feel like you guys probably would have a ton of things in common.
Yeah.
Um, and her thing was, if you just get me in the room,
Mhm.
get me in front of them, I'm good. I don't need you anymore. Just get me in the room. And she was such an amazing salesperson. And she had very little formal training or education. It's just she knew people. And that is a superpower, right? Like the fact when you were sharing the part of the story where you took the flyers face to face, and obviously the part about being in radio, that my mom would have done that, right? Like I feel like myself, I'd be a little more hesitant. I'm a little more introverted, and I obviously was not in the same place. Well, she didn't have a choice. It was
Yeah.
like hustle or fall to the wayside, right? Like it was, she had to take care of her kids. She didn't have anyone paying the mortgage anymore. She had a lot to lose. She just ran with it, right? And I feel like that level of um not caring what people think, and not letting that kind of, cloud your ideas, just kind of kept her steadfast. And going back to the people work with people, we talked about this a little bit before we started recording, the social media part of what you do, or what you do, coaching women and entrepreneurs to tell their stories. Specifically, what you do is for different media platforms. And you and I were talking before we started recording about, social media, right? How much do we want to talk about social media? I feel like it's relevant to bring up and touch on. But I think, and what I said to you earlier, I think the social media aspect allows people to stay introverted. They think that they're, sending out these types of messages or clips or reels or whatever, and they're just going to millions and millions of people. And so that'll stick. And what you hopefully learn eventually before you give up is that's not where it happens. It happens with people, it happens face to face, it happens out in your community, right? And another divine timing thing is, like, I started with the social media game, even though that felt really uncomfortable for me. And then I can't say quickly. I wish it would have been quickly, but eventually started scaling back and doing networking events and chamber events and featuring female business owners in my community on this podcast, because I needed to meet the people,
Right.
right? And hearing what you said about storytelling, uh, it blows my mind that I do this podcast, because the version of me 2 years ago would never have been caught dead doing something like
Right.
this. But
And you
I,
do video. A lot of people launch a podcast, they don't do video because it's an extra layer of protection.
It is. And
Mhm.
the reason I did the video was just so I had content to put on social media
Yeah.
because the more I don't have to do,
Yeah, I get it.
organically, the
I
better.
get that.
But
I
I
get that.
but I do think that like what you were saying about helping people share their stories or just giving people a platform to share their stories is so healing, regardless of what you've been through or are going through, just the connection to other people specifically. And I think a lot of our stories, females, other women,
Mhm.
um, gives gives perspective like nothing quite else can do. And so I connect so much with that story, and it was thank you so much for
Yeah.
sharing all of that. um I want to talk a little bit about storytelling because obviously you've got the resume to back it up. I think that is abundantly clear at this point. Talk to me about what it looks like to work with you to build a story and to prep for. I mean, we haven't even touched on the fact that you were a TEDx speaker, but for someone who is wanting to start doing speaking engagements, what does that look like?
Well, let's talk about for a second. Then you were talking about your mom and the what it took for her to now she's got to raise these kids and the mortgage isn't paid. And I was in a very traditional place where I was super happy to be at home, didn't have to worry about like earning the money. Wasn't like we were rich or anything, but we were ready for the sacrifices we were going to make for me to be home with Hunter. So when my husband passed away, much like your mom, it's like, okay, what now? And I had two conversations with Wesley about the inevitability of his passing. One I've never shared with anyone and never will. And the other one was about Hunter. And he said to me, "You'll do everything right. You'll make no mistakes." I'm like, "Oh, I'm going to make so many." He says, "No, because you'll always put Hunter first. So do what we've been doing and he'll be fine. You'll all be fine." Chokes me up.
Mm-hmm.
So I was like, I need to figure out a way to feed my kid and feed my soul and be home by 3 o'clock every day when he gets home from school. So for me, I had to figure out a way to live a purposeful life and get paid to do it. And so when we're talking about how do you work with me or what would it be like to be a speaker, where do you want your message seen or heard or felt, it starts with why. If you don't have a really good reason for showing up to whatever it is, whatever platform you think is the dreamy platform or the dream project, if your why isn't aligned, then those no's and all those things that get in the way will detour you in another direction that is so far off from what you hope for your life. So for me, my why, feed my kid, feed my soul, be home by 3 o'clock. You cannot work an 8 to 5 and be home by 3 o'clock. Just can't. So I had to figure it out. And meanwhile, I have to figure out a way to earn money so that when he like is ready to go to college, I don't have a part-time job. I have built a foundation that I can grow and earn and have purpose. And so the first thing that I look for in a client is their story. And 100% almost of the time, I can see things in their story that they can't see for themselves. Let's say 90% or 80%. Let's not say 100%, but usually there's some little nugget in there that they haven't thought of. And so, what I think when you talked about your mom was a great salesperson, I still don't know that I know how to sell, but I know how to tell a story, and that sells. So, Instagram is a tough one for me because, I wrote a 382-page book. I gave a 17-minute TED Talk. I have people on my show for 22 minutes. Telling a story in 7 seconds is nearly impossible for me to do. And I struggle with it because this I would do all day long
Mm-hmm.
because I'm now getting to share our stories together. And your audience is going to listen to this and they are going to trust me from the moment I show up on their screen or they hear my voice because they trust you. And there's just no better audience than a trusted audience
Mm-hmm.
because hopefully they're still listening, they're still engaged and they've come here for you. And if you brought me here, then they're up for it. And the same is true in magazines, in newspapers, in digital magazines, on a stage at an event. How many times do we go to an event we pay a ticket for? And then that person talks and we're grabbing our phone to figure out more about them before they leave the stage or after they leave the stage. Hopefully we're not looking at our phone when they're talking. But you know what I'm saying? It's the way that works for me, and I believe in it with all of my heart and storytelling soul. I believe in it. So when someone comes to me and they say, I have a story or I have an expertise or I have something I want to share, that my life won't be the same without getting to share it, that's who I want to work with. Because you can make money, you can find a way, you can share, there's all kinds of ways to make money on the internet and on social media and all the things. But if you want to share your story to impact people, and then you get to make some money doing that, that's the sweet spot.
Mm.
That's what I believe.
Wow. I
Mhm.
totally agree. I think, for me, this podcast it served a couple of purposes, right? First and foremost, it was a type of marketing that I couldn't get anywhere else where I could build kind of immediate rapport of like, this is who I am, right? Like, you're not going to
Right.
see who I am on Instagram stories or any of those platforms because I can't convey. You can't really get a good read for me. I could, there's all sorts of misinformation, right?
Sure.
Misrepresented people on social media. But in this platform, this is how I show up for clients, right? This is the
Yeah.
closest thing you're going to get to an example of what it's like to work with me, what it's
Hmm.
like to talk to me, what it's like to just engage with me in general. And that's what it started as, right?
Yeah.
I had to break through the barrier of being uncomfortable and showing my voice and my face. I literally thought I could market my business without ever using my voice on any sort of platform. It felt way
Yeah.
too much, right?
Yeah. But
So
aren't
that's
you
one
glad
thing.
you got past that, right?
I am glad, and I wish it would have happened sooner, but it all happens when it's supposed
Sure.
to. But yeah, and I think that that is a perfect example of. I love the example of going to an event where people are talking. You're not. It's not a concert. It's not a music festival. You're not
Yeah.
going because you want to see this one person. You're going because you trust the organizers. You trust the subject matter, whatever it may be. And then you're being introduced to these people. And so it is kind of a gateway, so to speak,
Yeah.
of how to get yourself in the right rooms. And I love the why. I think too, your I help statement, the why, like all of those being really, I actually, the episode this week that came out is with a local branding expert, Eloise, who has become a friend of mine. And I don't know when this episode that we're recording now will air, but as we're recording it, that was this week. And she talks about branding. And it's like every single thing from the email correspondence back and forth, every touch point is part of your brand. You're sending the same message. You got to understand what message you're sending and so on and so forth. And it's just all of these things kind of overlap. And I think it's just a reminder of how to have a good foundation in place hopefully before you start pitching
Right.
all these things, right?
Yeah.
All right. So talk the pitch playbook is that what you're heavily promoting right now that you're working on currently. Tell me what that is.
Well, you had just said that hopefully you have some of that in place already. And what I found through the pitch playbook is so people buy my pitch playbook and super clear. It is not a playbook that you download that you get and then you do the work. It is a custom playbook where you fill out a questionnaire and I take your goals and the things that you've done and the links that you share, your website, your funnels, your social media, whatever it is that you send me. And I live as I'm opening those tabs. I start recording a Loom video and I look at it for the first time as if I'm a producer, which I am a television producer, radio producer, host. I've been a magazine editor. So I look at it through those eyes and help you decipher which parts of your story fits with which type of media. And even where some of your offers could tweak a little to be more aligned with not pitching media and being successful that way, but the more clear your offers are to the media, the more clear they are to the people you're offering them to. And so what I found is, so then I record this Loom video, then I create a very detailed playbook, a plan for what your specific story would do in the media, or where you could place, how you would go about pitching, which ones you'd pitch, not specific like this magazine, but just overall, where does your story fit? And you can run with that if you want to. There's certainly enough to-dos and specifics. It's very customized to you, or we can work together and we can do that together. And what I found is people aren't quite ready, meaning like I've worked a little bit with their branding, tweaking some things, tweaking their offers a little bit. And I'm happy to do that. That's part of it. It's part of what, if we work together one-on-one, I'm not going to send you out pitching for them to come back and see breaks in your messaging or a website that's not quite right. I love that websites are making a comeback, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
And so, just making sure that you're ready to receive all that's coming your way and then go out and pitch. So the playbook is basically the step one to having my eyes and my expertise looking at what your potential is. And then again, if you want to run with it on your own, you can. But the other cool thing is, so far it's converting at like almost 80%.
Mm.
And because it's like you said, they're hearing me look at their stuff. And these might be an hour, 45 minutes, 35 minutes, 45 minutes, an hour, whatever time it takes to go through all the things that they send. And they're getting a good sense of what it would be like to work with me. And they're seeing that I'm seeing things that they weren't aware of at first or hadn't thought about yet. And so that's really the fun in it. And the other thing it does is, for one, it eliminates discovery calls in that way, because it's kind of our discovery call that they've paid for. So they're showing up for it. Not that people don't come to discovery calls when they're not paid. I get it. Lots of businesses thrive that way. This is just my way of seeing. Now I've seen their business up close. It's also a way for me to decide if it's a good fit. So it's just a win-win, and I absolutely love it. And it's the thing I talk about all the time because I'm so happy to do them, whether they convert to one-on-one clients or not. But I just think it's a win-win for me to get to help and for them to get to have that interaction. And then I also do a live version, and it's true that once you start putting your offers out there, your clients or your potential clients will start telling you what they need. And someone reached out to me and they said, could I do a one-on-one call instead of the playbook? And so I created a one-on-one call that is the playbook live, and they still get the playbook at the end, but they're with me for that hour. And so that's a little bit different, but I actually need to add that to my my offer page. I haven't done that yet, but it came from someone saying, can we please do this? And I said, sure. So let's do it that way then. So either way works. And
Yeah.
I just love doing it.
I love the side note about kind of like the client beta tester, because that is they are all kind of beta testing. And when I first started offering um, any offerings for coaching, it was, I'm just gonna throw some ideas out there, see what
Yeah.
people are receptive to, and then and I remember this specifically, I offered an 8-week container and a 12-week container. Well,
Mhm.
everyone went for the 8-week container because it was cheaper,
Right.
obviously. And everyone was like, okay, well, 8 more weeks. And I, that's great. They were converting, they were continuing working
Yeah.
with me, but really it felt kind of negligent on my part. Like, just start them with 12 regardless,
Yeah.
because that extra 4 weeks is foundation building. And I wouldn't have known that until I got in and started seeing market research, so to speak,
Yeah.
right? Um, so I think that's a great message for anyone who does have offerings. Like, don't have them set in stone. Like, give some wiggle room. Like, listen to your audience, listen to what people want, because they will tell you, and get feedback. Good
Yeah.
Lord, ask for
Yeah.
feedback, because
Yeah.
that is your bread and butter. That's what you
For
need to
sure.
know. The client experience is is very, very important. I think that was my main thing when I was setting up packages and communication flow, all of those things. I wanted to make sure that because in my opinion, I'm customer number one, right?
Sure.
I'm making it to reflect how I would want to be reached and so on and
Right.
so forth. And it was so important to me to have that chain of communication the way I would want it, the way I would be impressed by it. And it took a while to figure out how that works, right? In the,
Yeah.
cadence, if you will. But now I figured it out on the front end and it works and I've kept it and I wasn't scrambling and all those things. I just love this. I'm like, I need to do this pitch playbook. I think that this is such a cool idea. And I love
Ah,
how you wrapped it. Uh, the way you explained it instead of a discovery call really made sense to me. I'm not sure that a lot of people listening will really understand how you kind of made that work for you. But you're right. Like, I offer free discovery calls and I have
and
people
they
do,
work.
and
That's
they
why I said they
do.
work. Yeah.
They
Hmm.
do, but it's an interview process, right? Like not only are they interviewing me, but I'm also interviewing them. And are we a good match? Like it's not just their opinion, their choice, right?
Right.
It is on both ends. But I think for you, the way that you've set it up really lands for me because I'm like, wow, I mean, I could maybe just answer some of their questions in that first call that wasn't really necessary for a long container, but I'm still benefiting from the time I'm spending, right?
Mhm.
So I'm gonna take that little tidbit and sit with that for a minute and see what comes from
Well, I
that.
mean, you could come up with any version, and I'm encouraging all of my clients to come up with their version of the playbook. Um, I had originally my one-on-one offer was a 30-day, 3-month, 6-month. And I even said on the website, I don't put specifics under the columns because your story is your story, and you might want to do this or this instead of that, whatever the case. And then as I've been doing it longer and longer and getting the feedback, and even a client who's onboarding here soon, like in the next week, she was like, "So what do I get? And how does this work?" And I thought it needs to be more clear. So just yesterday I went and updated. So the 30-day is like a sprint. It's someone who has their branding dialed in. They have to apply. So if they don't fit in the sprint, they don't fit in the sprint. But someone who has the branding dialed in, their messaging, their offers, and there's one thing that they want to pitch. Maybe it's that sponsorship deal. Maybe it's a speaking event that they've been trying to get. Whatever it is, we'll work on that together. And then the 3-month is what everyone gravitates toward, right? Because it's in the middle. And it has a very specific list of things that we'll accomplish in a big way. You could take that and duplicate it for months to come, and that could be how you get your media and your deals and sponsorships and all of that. And then the 6-month is more so you're committed to making this part of your strategy, your ongoing visibility strategy. And it has me in there monthly adjusting, helping with pitching based on what you're offering, what you're promoting. It's just this longer term option. And so that's how I have it laid out right now. Now, I might find over the next few months that maybe I need to tweak a few things, or maybe I'm too specific or not specific enough. I'm okay with all of that because right now I think you look at it and you say, oh, okay. And then the people who came in before I made those changes and just here's the timeline for us working together, they were happy with that too.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it is a matter of getting to know your students, your clients, your offers, and being willing to make adjustments and figure it out. But one thing that has remained the same is the playbook. It
Yeah,
is it is the entry point for both myself and the client, where it's just you want to. They always say make it a no-brainer, and
yeah.
most of the testimonials I get back, at some point they've said this is a no-brainer. This
Mm-hmm.
is a no-brainer to work with you. And that's what we always say, right? You got to make it a no-brainer. And so to do that with this 97 essentially low ticket option, I feel really happy to be able to do that. Grateful to be able to share that.
One thing I want to that came up for me when you were explaining, figuring out what works for your clients and meeting them where they are, and you also have to figure out what works for you
Mhm.
because when you're the facilitator, when you're the talent, right? Like you're the one that has to show up to hold space for these people. It also has to be about what works for you. How are you serving these people best? What feels the most authentic? That's something that's come up for me a lot of like, how do I keep myself sane, whether it's boundaries that I set or, self care or whatever, to where I'm still showing up in the same integrity with 10 plus clients as I was with one client,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
and that kind of ebbs and flows your offerings too, because for me it was like, if I'm going to spend 8 weeks committing and digging deep and then you just quit after 8 weeks, I'm invested, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, I've never had anyone only work one container with me, but still, like it is, so it's like 12 weeks. At least I have 4 more weeks
Yeah.
of
That's when it's
of
getting good, right?
foundation.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you
I mean,
don't
I'm
know
a
that
golfer
until you're
now.
in
I
it.
took up golf, and this is the comparison. Uh, I I don't really start swinging well till like the sixth hole, and I only play nine, so
Mhm.
that's not much fun. So sometimes I'll go out for 18. I might only play 13, 14, depending on the time and the weather and the sun. But it takes me a little bit to get warmed up.
Got to
And
get
that's
you
how I feel about
stretched.
this too. That's how
Yeah.
I feel about this too. You make a really good point. It's like you don't want to stop the potential. You stop short of what's next. Yeah, I agree with that.
I think if you find yourself in any sort of business or a profession of any kind where you're helping people, that's that typically is part of your why, right? Like I want to share my story, I want to help people. Maybe it's the whole why, maybe it's just part of
Right.
it. But if you can't help those people, you start to get complacent. You start to
Hmm.
lose the passion. And
Right.
that, to be able to continue helping people, you got to make sure it's authentic for you and in your own integrity. And so
Right.
I wanted to share that because that's what came up for me when I heard you say that. And I think that's a really great reminder for anyone who is, because so many people are in the business of helping people, right? Whether they
Right.
are civil servants in healthcare,
Right.
coaches,
Mhm.
whatever. It's like you are out there sharing stories, whatever, to hopefully inspire or help other people. But if you lose sight of that, the whole thing changes.
Yeah,
Right. And so just
absolutely.
coming back to that, I think is a really great reminder. I, we're going to be friends, Lisa, because I
We
feel
are
like
friends.
talking to you and hearing this and being inspired, like there's just so many things that are clicking here for me. And so I'm really
Yeah,
happy
me too. Yeah.
that we were able to do this and chat. Before we wrap up, I mean, obviously, I'm going to put all the ways to reach Lisa and to find Lisa's book, which is like so great. Um, but I want to end today's recording with having you share something from your hype list. And I'm not sure if you're familiar, but obviously we're on the Hype Squad podcast. The whole name came from this assignment I give to clients called the Hype List. And what it essentially is achievements, obstacles that you've ever come that you're proud of yourself, giving a way to be full of yourself and brag about something that you're really proud of. So I would love, as we wrap this up, to hear something that you want to brag about yourself.
Um, well, you know how it's hard for women to take compliments?
Mhm.
And that's the whole, that's why you're asking me to say something about myself. The compliment that I always receive uh, is that I'm a good mom, that I did a good job, that I'm doing a good job. And so, um, losing Wesley, I mean, I didn't have another plan for my life, but I knew had to be a really big reason for him not to be on the planet. And it was up to me as our son's mom to bring to fruition whatever greatness could come, not in spite of losing him, but really because of it. And I talk about Wesley. I bring awareness to organ donation. I've partnered with Donate Life America on a few different amazing things. Um, there's no way that I'll leave the planet without people knowing that I honored Wesley and I took good care of our kid. And is that is it. That's my brag because every single other thing I do is either me trying to be an example for him, provide for him, inspire him, earn his respect and trust. That's it. And so when people meet my son and they tell me what a great young man he is, he's 26 years old now, and all of these things, he's a good, solid kid and he can have a conversation about anything with anyone. You know, he'll come home now and we'll stand up at the top of the stairs. And it happened all the time when he was a kid. If you said, "How was your day?" when he was little, be ready because he's going to tell you all about it. And he still does. And so just last time he was home, we ended up standing at the top of the stairs, you know, outside his bedroom, down the hall from mine, talking for 45 minutes. And so he wrote me I asked for my birthday when I turned 50. I'm 53 now. I asked for him to do a Finch song for me, where, you know, you send in, they fill out the questionnaire and do the song. So that's what I wanted for my birthday. I didn't know what it was going to be. And he had a song written for me, and it was called My Favorite Person. And it was really fun. It's a really good song, and I have it forever. It's just, we're just solid. And I know he would have been solid with his dad here too, but man, living my life without his dad hasn't been easy. But sharing my life with Hunter has been just the greatest gift of my life. So that's my brag. My kid is my brag.
You got me with that one, Lisa.
Well, I could talk about business, I guess, but it all stems
Oh,
from wanting to be a good mom to him. Yeah.
yeah, you got me real good with that one. That was
I'm
great.
sure you can relate. That's why we're going to be friends.
Yeah, I can relate in a lot of different ways. And my mantra for the past couple of years has been things are happening for me, not to me. And if
Mhm.
I see it as the universe hates me, God hates me, why would you do this to me? Then you can never come out from underneath that. But if you see it as what was this for? Like, what's the lesson here? And I was telling a client this yesterday. My husband got really annoyed with me this weekend and something happened. I don't remember what it was. And I was like, I think the lesson here is, and he was like, screw the lesson. I do not want to hear the lesson right now. And I'm like, okay, well, come back to me when you're ready and I'll tell you what the lesson is.
And I'll inform you of what we were supposed to learn here today.
But yeah, I mean, I think for me, I like the lesson's all I have, right? If I
Yeah.
don't find the lesson in it, if I don't find the beauty in it, then I will drown in misery. I will drown in comparison. I will drown in what ifs and what could have beens and all of those things. And I think that that was just a beautiful share that made me think of that. So thank you so much
Yeah.
for that. That was great.
You're welcome. I didn't have an answer prepared, but as you were asking, I thought there's just really no other thing than that. So I'm really grateful to to been able to spend all this time talking with you and sharing. Thank you for all your thoughtful questions. And I know what it's like to be on your side of the mic and to just ask really thoughtful questions in ways that I haven't been asked before. That's a nice thing too. So
Well,
it's
thank
good.
you. I think
Mhm.
that it's easier, in my opinion, sitting on this side of the conversation. The other, your side is way more vulnerable, sharing your own story. But for me and anyone who's like hosting or needing to ask questions, like just pay attention,
Yeah.
right? Like stay in the conversation,
Yeah.
engage. But also, like going back to what I said earlier about this being a rapport, like that's how coaching sessions are for me. Like
Yes.
I'm in it with you. And anyway, thank you for saying that. That was very kind.
Well, and also it when we were getting started here and we talked beforehand, because that's what we do on my TV show. We have a little chat first, then we get started. And you're like pushing the buttons and getting ready. And I thought, oh, this is kind of nice. I'm just gonna relax and just gonna answer questions and have a good conversation. I don't have to worry about time or tech or anything. So it's a pleasure. Thank you.
Well, yeah, anytime you want to come and take a break, take a load off, come on and we'll talk about stuff. So
Have me
thank
on
you
anytime you
so
want. I'd love it.
thank you so much, Lisa, for
Thank
coming and
you.
recording. Thank you for getting hyped with us. Everyone listening, thank you for being here. Be kind to yourselves, and we'll see you next time.